It is such an honor to host you. You might be one of the top people that's mentioned on this show that's never actually been on the show until today. So it is absolutely such an honor to host you. As I mentioned in the introduction, you are a former food addict, and so am I. It was a really harsh realization to come to that I was addicted to sugar. At one point, a few episodes ago, I made this point to somebody who was also an expert in food addiction and sugar addiction. And I said, if you told me that cigarettes were addictive, that wouldn't really be a problem. I'm not a smoker. It's kind of, not really in vogue in the society. So it's not really a risk for me. It's kind of expensive and it doesn't really sound good. If you told me that cocaine or heroin or crack was addictive, that's probably okay too, because I don't really know where to find it. I don't know who to find that can sell me that stuff. But if you told me that sugar was addictive, we have a massive problem because I can find it everywhere. Gas stations, hardware stores, the kids in the neighborhood selling it. It is everywhere. We have a huge problem if sugar is addictive.
It's the biggest problem today in society.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it's not only
mentioned,
that it's everywhere. One of the problem is too that it is such early exposure in our lives, as babies, toddlers, kids, before our brain is developed, and it really affects both our body and our brain.
yeah, it really, really does. There's a Michael Pollan quote, excuse me, where he describes basically the first time that his child tasted sugar, and it looked like this kid had a revelation. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. I live in a world where this exists. How can I find more? That's how we respond.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And when I grew up, there were some candy and ice cream, of course, and stuff like that, but very little. So I grew up on real food that my mom cooked. But today, the food, the mixture in the food is so much more dangerous. Like if you take an ice cream today and you go to a lab with it and look what's in it, and an ice cream that I got, in the 50s, it's totally different ball games. So the one you find today is much more addictive than it was before.
Wow.
That's scary to me.
Yeah, that's very scary. You have such an interesting story, and you mentioned, growing up on at least real food. But can you describe what it was like to grow up and discover your own sugar addiction?
Well, I didn't understand it, of course, for many, many years, but I knew I loved chocolate. Chocolate and ice cream were my favorites. I wasn't too much into bread and pasta and all that. I know some people are. I'm lucky I'm not, because that is worse, actually, because it totally rips your stomach apart. But, I loved the few times that I got chocolate and ice cream. And I kept thinking, when I grow up and have my own money, I'm not going to eat regular food. I'm going to only eat chocolate and ice cream. That's how much I loved it. But, it wasn't accessible. So, but when I was a teenager and I got my own money and I worked extra from school, I could buy more, of course. So I started to gain weight. And, that is something that girls and women go nuts over. So it wasn't until I was in nursing school when I was 19 that we started dieting. And I can look back and see now it was the dieting that really made it take off, because once you start denying your body, so you starve yourself. We had crazy diets at that time, eat nothing and then eat chicken or something. It was stupid. But anyway, we didn't know anything about nutrition. That's why. So anyway, when you start dieting, that's when you start gaining weight. Because when you push down and deny yourself certain foods that you're addicted to, and then you take one bite and think you're going to control it, you can't. That is addiction. You lose control. And then you're going to overeat again. And then you think, and you can't stop right away because the drug has such a horrible hold over your brain. So of course you think, well, I stop in a week and it's going to be 2 weeks or 5 weeks and you gain a lot of weight. And then you go on a diet spree again and try to deny yourself a lot of food and exercise like crazy and, try to eat healthy or less or whatever. And then you take one bite again because you don't understand that the chocolate and ice cream and the breads and the pastas, they are a psychoactive drug. So we have a saying, one is too much and 1,000 is never enough. So you're starting to go on the roller coaster, and each time you go back to the drug and you eat for a while, it has a stronger hold over your brain. So it's harder to stop, and you gain more weight. And then you push even harder. So, you try every goddamn diet. And this is what happened to me. But when I was 19 and I was doing this on and off thing, I started smoking because, the big girls told me that that's a way to suppress appetite. So, and then I was hooked on nicotine right away. I mean, it was like one day. And then, of course, in nursing school, partying, we started drinking. And then I was hooked on alcohol. So during these years, with the sugar, the nicotine, and the alcohol, I didn't really understand the power of sugar, but sugar is a gateway drug. So it was because of the sugar I became addicted to nicotine and alcohol so quickly. So then at 33, my American husband thought that I was drinking too much. So he forced me to go to treatment, which I will be forever grateful to him to do that. Wow. And that's when I started gaining knowledge. So I was 33 at that time, 1985. So I loved the science and everything I learned. So I fell in love with addiction medicine and neuroscience, and has been ever since. So the rest is sort of history. But I was sober for 7 years in recovery, but I kept smoking and drinking coffee and all that because I didn't understand that they were connected. And then I wanted to be even healthier. So of course I quit smoking and cut down on coffee. And then I heard this guy that I trained with, Terence Gorski, say that if you're an alcoholic or drug addict and you keep drinking lots of coffee and you eat junk food and you smoke, there is a higher prevalence to relapse into the alcohol or drugs. And I thought, I don't want that. So that's why I quit smoking and, wow, cutting down on coffee. And I thought to myself, thank God I don't eat junk food, because to me, the only thing that I saw as junk food was McDonald's, not chocolate and ice cream. So I kept eating chocolate and ice cream. And of course, taking away the nicotine, if you're addicted to several things and you take away one, the others get worse. That's how addiction works. That's how the illness in your brain works, no matter how you try to control it. But anyway, so of course, then my sugar addiction took off. And that's how I found out finally, thank God, what sugar addiction was all about. And I prefer to say sugar addiction instead of food addiction, because I like to talk about psychoactive substances, which is sugar sweeteners, all the flours you can think of, processed and ultra processed foods. And then, of course, we sugar addicts, we also have, I'm not addicted to a piece of meat. I'm not addicted to fat. I'm not addicted to salt in its pure forms, but it is the combination of things and processed food. That's what triggers the whole thing. But we have to remember too, that once you're sugar addicted and you start this dieting, starving, binging, overeating, they turn into addictions themselves. So they are process addictions. They are process addictions like gambling or, stuff like that, that develop because you try to control the substance. In this case, the different types of sugar, carbs, whatever you want to call it. So that's why we end up having such crazy eating behaviors. And that's why some people say, well, I could overeat anything. Yeah, but that's because you have been an overeater, a volume addict, because you were sugar addicted. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very important. So it's all the same thing. And in order to, you have to treat the holistic view, you have to treat, the whole addiction, all the outlets. And many of us turn to alcohol too when we have done sugar on off so much that it doesn't affect us that much anymore. You don't get a zing anymore. And then you try something more heavy. You start drinking or, pills or whatever, what have you.
Yeah.
That's so addiction.
Yeah. So interesting. I as part of preparation for this interview, I went back to listen to one of my very favorite books. I've listened to this several times. The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taubes. And
Yes.
he mentions in that book, he outlines smoking, something that you mentioned. A cigarette is different than tobacco and nicotine and things we used to smoke in the past. The thing that makes a cigarette is they take the nicotine, or the tobacco, excuse me, they soak it in sugar. That's what allows you to take in more of the addictive substances into your
Yes.
body. And that's how they addicted us to smoking.
And it goes up to your brain faster.
Crazy.
That's why it goes way, way faster up to your brain. And we know from all the studies in neuroscience and addiction medicine that the faster something works, the quicker you become addicted to it. And here's one thing that people don't understand, that bread is addictive, because when you chew it together with the enzyme amylase in your saliva, it turns into sugar and it goes straight out in your blood. And people say, oh, bread is not sugar. Yes, it is sugar. Flour is sugar. Hey, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pasta is
Keep bread
sugar.
in your mouth. It is,
Yep.
absolutely. If you keep bread in your mouth long enough, it will taste sweet. If you just chew
Oh,
it and get it down,
absolutely.
it won't taste
Yeah.
as sweet.
Yeah. Chew it
Wow.
20 times. You're going to see something interesting happening.